It is my pleasure to introduce our facilitator today, Nancy Polsky, Vice President of Nexa Learning. Nancy is a senior leader in corporate learning and organizational development who specializes in enhancing employee and organizational capabilities through employee development, leadership, training, and coaching. She is a recognized author, speaker, and industry award winner who has served as an advisor to the Chief Learning Officer magazine. Nancy is a certified ROI professional from ROI Institute and an International Coaching Federation professional coach. Additionally, she brings certification in positive psychology and mindfulness-based stress reduction to the measurable work she does with corporate leaders and executive teams. Nancy, the floor, or should I say the camera, is all yours. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin. And hello to everyone today. I know we've got folks joining us from all over. So I'm also from different job roles. So it's helpful for me if we could just start off with a quick poll to get a sense of who's joining us today. So if you would please indicate if you know your primary role. So it looks like we've got a nice variety of folks on from our L&D professionals to our HR folks and even sales enablement, and then some additional consultants or vendors. So thank you very much. That gives us a sense of how to tailor today's content to your needs. So I want to start by talking about what the objectives and what's in this for you today. So the goal of this session is really to empower us as HR and learning and development professionals to harness data-driven insights for our learning initiatives and to ensure that we align those learning initiatives with KPIs for business and for talent, and to create scale for our solutions, and that in turn drives individual growth for our participants and learners, and also business success for the organization. So like any good learning professional, we've got our learning objectives. So today we are going to be talking about some strategies to connect those learning initiatives to the KPIs for the business and talent functions. We are going to talk about leveraging our existing data points to create personalized learning paths to scale across the organization, and how we can gain further insights on measuring leadership development programs and their impact using data. So a quick agenda of what we'll cover is aligning those learning solutions with talent and business KPIs, leveraging that data to scale, and specifically focusing on leadership development and driving impacts to real world KPIs. We will be monitoring questions in the chat, and some we may take throughout. Otherwise, we will have a dedicated Q&A towards the end. Okay, so we've all been doing this for a while now. So of course, we're using the chat feature. Feel free to chat in there. And we also have the reaction. If you, I will ask you to give me a thumbs up or etc. And if you do want to speak, please raise your hand. And at the appropriate time, Erin will ask you to come off mute so that you can share. When you're not speaking, if you keep yourself muted, that will allow us to have, you know, a targeted conversation. Okay, so again, one more poll to help us understand you all, since we do have a lot of learning and HR folks on there, want to get a sense of which kind of learning measurement methodologies are you most familiar with today. Most folks have heard of Kirpatrick. Hopefully that's part of the reason you joined today. I want to get a sense of how many of you are familiar with Phillips ROI or some lesser known measurement methods, Kaufman, Brinkerhoff, others. Or maybe you're joining because you're not as familiar with measurement methodologies, and that's why you're here today. So just again, another few seconds. This is just a quick pulse check to see who's joining us. Like, good majority of folks are familiar with Kirkpatrick. We've got a smaller number of folks that are familiar with Phillips ROI, and much less so with Kaufman, Brinkerhoff, others, and just a couple folks who maybe are not as familiar with measurement methods. So again, thank you. That helps us. If you could give me a thumbs up emoji if you are actively using Kirkpatrick in the work that you do today. Okay, and what about Phillips? If you are using Phillips ROI methods today, you can give me a thumbs up. Within Kirkpatrick, there's the various levels of methods of measurement, and this is quite helpful for us. We're going to ask you another poll. We want to get a sense of which levels you're measuring within Kirkpatrick. So that will help me know how deep to go today. So again, we'll open this poll. If you were using what I call level 0, you measure participation rates, attendance versus registration, no-shows, etc. If you're measuring level 1, smiley sheets, feedback reaction forms. Level 2, quizzes, tests, scenarios that test people's knowledge gained. Maybe you are measuring to a certain extent the application on the job after the learning intervention. And maybe level 4, to what extent that's being rolled up and creating a business impact beyond the individual learner. Finally, to what extent ROI is being measured. So again, for your primary solutions, what do you typically measure? So it looks like a good majority of folks are measuring participation attendance rates. And learner reactions is also quite common. We've got over 70% of the folks measuring that. And a good deal of knowledge gains, level 2 types of assessment is also being done. Less so, it drops after that to less than half of the folks that are measuring a pull through beyond the knowledge gain. So the higher levels, level 3, level 4, and I don't think we had anyone who is measuring level 5. So, okay, good. Well, so that helps me learn to target this session today. So sometimes it's hard to know what to measure when, and so we're going to be giving out, it'll appear in the mailing that you'll get after this, the email, where we learning people, we L&D types, we often will reference Kirkpatrick, and generally speaking, our business and HR stakeholders, they don't ask for that, right? And I would like to shift the conversation today to say, it's time for us to shift how we frame our measurement and to focus on the metrics that will really drive deeper level business value. So moving beyond the traditional metrics, although those are important part of telling the measurement story, but getting to that deeper level of evaluation. So we often measure, right, what's easy, right? We measure the things that we can get a hold of, that data, the attendance data, the reaction survey data that we control, the knowledge checks that we build into the design of our solutions. So again, these are useful, they're part of the story, but they don't tell the full story of how learning can drive growth both for individuals and for the organization. So we're giving out this little handout, again, in the email, you'll get this. This is a little cheat sheet around what type of learning intervention you have and how deep to go, where it's possible to tell a deeper story. If you just have a 1-hour webinar, obviously you can't attribute deep organizational-wide impacts to a single 1-hour webinar, but this should help you. So a couple of things I want to say about this. Number one is we want to be intentional with what we measure when we measure, and to only collect feedback, for example, if you plan to act on it. So for example, if you already have a facilitator who has been facilitating a learning event, it's a tried and true, and you don't plan to do anything with that data, your learners are really busy, and any extra question you ask them that doesn't get acted upon or is not necessary is not a good use of their time. So to be very intentional about the questions you ask. So if you don't need one more piece of data about the facilitator because you know that they're fantastic, then and the solution is consistent, then you don't need to ask your learners that. The other thing is that if you are observing as a learning professional or an HR professional, you don't necessarily need to crowdsource to get a sense of if the facilitator was strong or if the content is going well, or if the facility and classroom is well established. You as the learning professional can make some of those determinations. So again, to focus on intentionality as to what questions you want to ask. So, I focus on two bottom line questions. Is one, was this a good use of your time? And two, will you put this to use in the next? Those provide me with the right data at the right time. Second, the other thing I want to say about what to measure when and how deep to go is to be clear to avoid over attribution. And what do I mean by that? I mean asking learners how much a single webinar transformed their skills on the job months later is misleading, potentially misleading, right? Think about leadership development. One webinar does not a great leader make, even a great webinar. And leading others is complex, right? And so data has to really reflect the actual realistic dynamics of what goes into leading others and improvements to human performance. Okay, so this is a framework that will be a guide to help align the right measurement levels with the types of learning interventions that you have. So the bottom line is that learning measurement isn't just about proving training, and it's about showing accelerate the data points that are important to your stakeholders, retention, onboarding, leadership effectiveness, et cetera. Those mission critical KPIs. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your stakeholders. So if you think about the stakeholders, some of you are HR leaders, but a good number of you are L&D professionals who presumably either report to HR leaders or line business leaders. So let's talk about the HR leaders. So in the chat, if you could please put in there, what are some of the things that HR and talent leaders care about? What types of KPIs, what type of metrics do they think about? Certainly something, right? The engagement is something. Recruitment, talent acquisition becomes important if the retention and turnover is a problem. Promotion, right? Promotion readiness, promotion rates, very good. Participation numbers still, right? Again, we're not saying it's not important. We're just saying we've got to get to a deeper level. Yeah. So these are the kinds of concerns that your HR leaders will typically bring to the table, right? The talent KPIs, what I'll call retention, engagement, promotion readiness, ensuring that you've got a strong leadership talent pipeline, all of the things that you've put in the chat. Thank you. And now think about your other business leaders. It could be sales executives. It could be operational executives. Their lens is performance, right? And so for them, what are the things that their KPIs that keep them up at night? In your experience, what is it that your business leaders are focused on? Also in chat. Yeah, so again, production, productivity. If you've got employee issues, reduction, maybe error reduction, if you're an operational executive. Quality issues, very good. Goals that are generally, performance and production types of goals. Right. So their lens tends to be performance. It could be sales, productivity, operational efficiency, error reduction, could be speed to onboard new people into their roles so they could become effective quicker. They care very much about the effectiveness of their frontline leaders to support people to successful performance. Right. In other words, business leaders are results driven. They're less interested in development for development's sake and sort of need the bottom line. So at the intersection of these, I would say, is leadership effectiveness. The frontline leaders, the executives care that the frontline leaders are able to successfully and effectively help their individuals get work done. And the HR talent leaders are also concerned that they strengthen their leaders to influence the engagement of the organization, reduce employee relations issues, reduce turnover, et cetera. So that this is an intersection for both your talent HR leaders and your business leaders, that leadership development is really key to influencing both the outcomes on the talent side as well as on the business side. So for us as L&D people, to be seen as a strategic partner, not just an order taker, really, we have to be able to speak their language and their language of impact. So that has to mean moving beyond the smiley sheets, moving beyond attendance counts, and using data to really drive how learning can drive outcomes that the stakeholders care about, whether it's reducing attrition or accelerating onboarding, boosting the frontline manager performance. It's really imperative for us as learning professionals that we align with the business and talent KPIs. So if you're only tracking the learning metrics, level 1, level 0 of attendance, and even level 2, you're missing an opportunity for what's important to the business, to the partners and sponsors. For most of us learning people, we have HR sponsors or maybe direct leaders. Our ability to provide learning data that impacts not just HR measures, but HR measures that drive business results enables us to be that strategic partner to our HR leaders for them in turn to add value to the business leaders. Okay, so we're going to talk through about how L&D data can link to real-time business and talent outcomes. And so it stops really being just a support function and becomes more of a strategic engine for change. So it's hard to know where to start. This is great in theory. I'm sure you've heard this before. So we're going to walk through 3 case studies of where we've seen success in starting. So I like to start with the data that you already have. The data that we often have is our own data, right? So L&D types of data. So it could be that you use assessment data as part of your learning intervention. So can you give me a thumbs up if you already use assessment for your learners to gain insights into baselining their own strengths and opportunity areas as part of your learning solutions? So that's a great way to help have the learners gain insights. We at Nexa Learning are a Diamond partner, a Diamond Award winner with Wiley & Sons. We do a lot of assessment work to help gain insights into learners' strengths and opportunity areas so that they could use that as a tool within the learning solution to create customized learning and customized development ongoing based on their data, their results. So we started with data that we already have in the pre-work assessment. We use DISC, the suite of DISC personality DISC assessments quite extensively, and we couple that with other data insights for our individual learners, like 360 feedback results. We also may have from time to time other pre-work like quick engagement pulse surveys, so that these are built into the learning initiative and they give you and your learners tools to help them. So these have been historically used for the individual as a self-awareness tool, right? And as a goal-setting tool to help them within the context of the learning and development solution. So want to ask you if you can put in chat maybe a thumbs up if you are taking that data beyond the individual learner and aggregating that data in any capacity, maybe across a cohort to look at trends across a cohort, maybe aggregating across the organization to create broader insights. So if you could just put in the chat a thumbs up or just a yes if you're doing that, aggregating your data more strategically. So it sounds like maybe not. And so if not, you may be missing a powerful opportunity to support your stakeholders. So let me show you what we did with one of our cases. So we did have a lot of individual data that we were historically using for the individual learners within the context of the learning solution. So we had the DISC work of leaders assessment that we use, survey that we use prior to the learning intervention for them to gain insights into their strengths and opportunities. We used those in the classroom, in the learning coaching that followed the classroom to help them create individualized learning, individualized development plans on things that they wanted to continue to get better at. And so that is a great way to have data-driven, individualized learning to scale. But we were leaving a lot of opportunity on the table because we had hundreds of learners go through this solution. And we had literally thousands of data points that we were leaving on the table because we were leaving it at the individual learner level. So what we did was we aggregated the data confidentially so that we could respect the learner's confidentiality, but to reveal broader themes and patterns. So we looked at the disc work of leaders, the 360, and what they were planning to do for their development plans. And across a cohort, and then more broadly across the organization, we could identify themes. And so we saw that as an organization across the cohort, but again, across all of the cohorts that we had run for the year, that it really had a very strong people-centered leadership culture, which was fantastic because it was really the core value that that company drove. And so that you could really see that in the results. We also saw across the organization that 13% of the organization were rated strongly through their work of leaders and their DISC assessments on their communication skills. And importantly, that they wanted to get better at it in their development plans. So when we layered the different data points, we were able to see that leaders excelled specifically in execution as a very execution-oriented organization, but that they lacked the strength in the vision and the alignment to that vision and how they communicated that vision. That wasn't in place on to be as effective as they wanted to. They were driving, but they didn't stop to make sure people were clear of the mission and clear of the alignment. So this helped us to connect the learning data to the organizational outcomes that they were looking to do. And so we could do a few things once we had that data. Number one, we could go to our sponsors and say, let's celebrate success here. Let's celebrate beyond the classroom. And so as an organization, you have really strong people first leadership. And one of the clients I was coaching with ended up winning an international award within the company as really somebody who modeled this behavior of people first leadership. And so we also encourage leaders across the organization to share best practices in a peer type of coaching environment and what was working well. The aggregated data allowed us to use that to drive deeper formal learning. So we were able to say, let's go deeper around communication. That's where people wanted to continue to grow and develop. And we could even customize that by business unit or geography. So this now became an opportunity for us to strategically share this with the stakeholders. We could take the HR results, these results to the HR leaders, and they could cross-reference it with their other KPIs. So some of those that you mentioned earlier, they could take it and look at their engagement results or their exit interview data or what their hiring and promotion patterns look like. And so this allowed them to tell a more complete story of targeting. Yes, it did help us target additional deeper level learning interventions, but they also were able to say, you know what, we need to target beyond learning other talents types of interventions, some engagement action planning for particular areas, some additional recognition programs for certain job levels, compensation study where they were seeing some data trends between the learning and the other. So it not only helped them drive more targeted formal L&D and spend their training dollars by data-driven spend, but they were able to use it in partnership with other talent data points. It also helped us really elevate our learning outcomes because not only could we have a controlled environment in our learning solution, but we were able to build informal communities of practice focused on real-time challenges. So especially because this is a leadership development program, and a lot of the skills in leadership are difficult to measure. They're sort of squishy, and what does it mean to be a good communicator? It is different depending on who you ask. And so because we were able to aggregate this data, we were able to identify who were the higher performers on these hard to measure competencies. And those folks in turn ended up driving informal communities of practice within the business. So they got others together who wanted to continue to get better. So you had somebody who was good. Really, what do they say? The highest form of mastery is to teach. And so someone who was already good, by teaching and paying it forward with others, could be great, best in class. And so now that you really get a win-win, where those folks who are still developing are learning from this topical expert, and this topical expert is now really becoming best in class at that particular competency area. So imagine that for a moment. If everyone went from good to great, if you identified an area where you were strong, and then you could pay it forward with informal, functional peer-to-peer types of mentoring on the job, what that does for the organization, if everyone had one thing that they really elevated, and rising tides lift all boats, the power of that elevation across an entire organization. So this is really important because it's a soft skill. Leadership development is, often is difficult to define in actionable ways, but this allowed us to do that. So would love to ask you in the chat really quickly, what data do you already have in your learning solutions that maybe up until now you've been using for individual learners, but that this is starting to help you think about, maybe I can aggregate some of that, maintaining confidentiality, to uncover broader trends for the organization. So in the chat, what kinds of data do you think you already have in your learning solutions that you could potentially aggregate and provide new insights? Development plans, right? So we were able to see not just 83% of people were not strong at communications, but of that, 57% wanted to make that one of their top areas of development. It wasn't actually 57%, I'm just saying that, but right, so that you could take the development plan data. Often we do development plans in class, in the learning intervention, where people, what do you want to get better at? But you could collect that data, and then the power of aggregating that. Great. And more, same thing with the 360s. What is the perceived strengths and areas of opportunity across the organization? So you're starting to tell a more powerful story, a more complete picture of what targeted support can be needed across the organization. Okay, thank you. So, right, that was really to show how you can start with L&D types of data and use that to show some more value that across the organization. I want to talk through a second case, which is about leveraging real-time business data to adjust our learning solutions, which in turn solves real-time business problems. So this is an example where we had a case in a sales organization. This was in the pandemic, where we had a move from managers, sales managers, and sellers being co-located on premises to everybody moving to work from home. And in this particular industry, their sales came to a standstill because of the pandemic. And so we became aware of the sales metrics that were, creating a lot of challenge in the organization. So the pipeline was really frozen because of the macroeconomic public health issues. And managers were coming down heavy on traditional sellers who were quite successful in terms of what I call farming, quite successful in maintaining great relationships with their clients, and were not doing a lot of hunting themselves. And so managers were really starting to encourage them to go out and hunt for new business, and doing this remotely in real time. And so the sellers lacked those hunting skills. They were incredible with client relations. In hunting was something they hadn't done in a long time in their career. So they were resistant to hunting. It also, hunting for new business took away time for them to continue to farm their existing client business, which again, the industry changed and they really needed to spend that time in support of their existing clients. So there was a lot of resistance in the business. And so there were pulse surveys that the organization did. The talent team did some pulse surveys and found that the engagement of the sellers was really suffering, that the sellers felt unheard because they were saying, we don't have time to hunt for new business. And they felt micromanaged. And what they saw was that their managers were going from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom meeting. We all probably know that pretty well. And that they were reporting that they felt unheard. So these business sales metrics were providing us insights in our L&D solutions in real time. So we could see, okay, sales were down. The early prospect pipeline was not where it needed to be for the sales cycle. The talent metrics around the employee pulse surveys had people, feeling their engagement downturn. And so we were able to pivot our L&D solutions in real time because we had now had data-informed information that came from talent and business KPIs. So we offered a few things. Number one, for the sales managers, we created optional crucial conversations, crucial accountability webinars because they were needing to drive greater accountability around hunting for new business. That was challenging for them. It was new to manage people remotely. We ended up having a lot of participation in those conversations that were optional. Number two, this was actually really interesting. We had 16% of the sales managers were having one-on-one coaching at the time that the organization switched from in-person to work from home, and that this was all happening. And again, because the data in the pulse survey showed that the sellers felt like, my manager doesn't listen to me, we had the managers that we were coaching with. I'm a mindfulness-based certified in mindfulness-based stress reduction, and I had them do, this is really so interesting, just take 3 quick breaths before they got on to their next Zoom one-on-one. Again, because they were running from meeting to meeting. Just 3 quick breaths before they get into their next one-on-one. And what happened was really incredible, that the people felt listened to. They felt like their managers could have greater attention to them. And in addition to what we did to support the sales managers with additional webinars and coaching support, we were able to offer for the sellers some hunting talks. So we had breakfast for closers and some senior hunter types who were able to have some optional seller solutions. So we were able to adjust our L&D solutions in real time in response to the business and talent KPIs that we were seeing. And so as a result, we saw that for that population that got involved in the sales managers who had opted into the webinars and who took the breaths, that they saw a 3% increase in their sellers' pipeline. Whether their sellers participated in the hunting breakfasts or not, actually. So, and also for those leaders that their engagement scores, their pulse check went back up again, so that compared to the rest of the population, those that took 3 deep breaths before they got on to their next Zoom call had greater engagement results where their people said, I feel listened to. So really very powerful data to see how in real time you learn about business KPIs or talent headaches of the day. You can adjust your solutions in real time to help solve their problems. Now, they weren't asking me to offer optional webinars or breakfast for closers or deep breaths in the coaching. We saw that we could affect some improvements by adding those. We measured it, and we saw the results. So just want to check on in chat, if you think about what are some real-time business problems that you or your business leaders might be experiencing, and how that could potentially be addressed by pivoting your learning interventions. So some issues around driving accountability that you may see through the KPIs in the business and the talent KPIs. So it might help you inform your pivot on your learning interventions. Great, thank you. So the next and final case I want to talk through is to showcase how leadership development initiatives in particular can solve the C-suite headaches by helping them to create transparency, by tracking progress, and by driving organizational growth through both their business and talent KPIs. So again, our role as L&D people, I believe it's to anticipate organizational challenges and to help solve them proactively. So I want to share a case where we did that using real-time data for what was the C-suite's biggest headaches. So we had an executive team that had a high growth organization. The organization's revenue was growing quickly, and they needed next level leaders to step into senior roles. They did have talent reviews. They did do succession planning 9-box, and they knew who their high potentials were, but those folks were not yet ready to step into senior leadership. They had development plans in place for them, but it lacked the gravitas for those development plans. So the first thing that we did was to meet them where their biggest headache was. So they had a group of next level high potentials who were not ready quite yet to step into senior roles. We worked with them to really craft really good, meaningful development plans. So they went from these, high reliance on the 10% formal learning, read this book, take this class, watch this webinar, to say, let's give them some really meaningful stretch assignments on the 70% experiential on the job. Let's give them some really good 20% learning from others in real time, specifically learning from the C-suite. They took on some of the C-suite stretch opportunities to offset the fact that the C-suite was now going to be tutoring, mentoring them. So they took some of their projects as stretch assignments. So we leaned into that 90% rather than heavy focus on the 10%. And what we saw was that at the end of the year, 83% of those next level leaders got promoted, were ready to step into the senior leadership role. So I've been doing this a long time. I know 70, 20, 10 or some combination of focus on informal coupled with formal learning works. And so in my mind, I knew this was a proof of concept, and what that is good for those next level leaders getting ready to go into senior leadership is good for the whole organization. And so from there, we were able to see across the full leadership team. And what we saw was that leaders who were meeting their KPIs, their business metrics, their sales measures in this case, there was a group of leaders who were sort of unsung heroes, where they were developing other leaders, the newer leaders, they were bringing along new leaders, and that those efforts were not getting recognized. So people were being promoted for their sales KPIs, for their business production KPIs. And we had leaders whose business KPIs were strong. Additionally, they were the type of leader who were coaching and developing next level leaders, and that was going unrecognized. So we created a dashboard that showed not just the business KPIs, but also talent KPIs. So we were able to look at not just who's meeting their business metrics, but who is got high engagement scores, who's got high retention rates, who has been a successful champion of developing leaders out of their business unit and across the organization to contribute broadly. And so by creating a dashboard that included talent KPIs, not just business KPIs, it showed a more nuanced picture of who your real leaders were. And so what we saw was that this was super helpful for historically underrepresented voices. That is, one of the most impactful results that we saw was that even though those leaders had strong business KPIs, equally strong to their peers, their disproportionate contributions to development and mentorship were historically going underreported and overlooked. And by creating this new dashboard, you could really have visibility into that and reward that. And so what we saw was 70% with this creation of this new dashboard, 70% of historically underrepresented leaders with KPIs equal, business KPIs equal to other high performers were then in turn promoted. So, very proud of the data insights that drove that decision-making across the organization. Again, once we started doing these things across the high potentials and solving the C-suite's immediate problems, we were able to show them this is really just a pilot, this is really just a proof of concept, and we could roll it out to scale across the organization. So traditionally in that organization, only about 20% of leaders had development plans. Those were usually the folks who were identified as high potentials in the succession planning. And so we took the same concept of 70, 20, 10 and creating really good development goals. What we had done with those high potentials stepping into senior leadership, and rolled that out across the whole leadership. By the end of that by the end of year 2, almost all of the leaders at all levels had meaningful development plans that we went from 20% to 95% of leaders. We also saw as a result that the retention of leadership was almost at 100%. When people felt like they had a pathway to career growth, that learning and development was a path to grow in their current role, even if they couldn't necessarily be promoted in the next 6 months, the leaders themselves were engaged and they stayed. after we rolled it out to leaders, we said there's nothing magical about people leading titles. And the same concept applies for individual contributors. So we had even fewer individual contributors having development plans before this initiative. And as we rolled it out first with the C-suite headache to this next level leaders stepping into senior, and then we rolled it out to the full leadership team, we then rolled it out to individual contributors. And you could see that by the end of year 3 that we had over 95% of non-sales individual contributors had meaningful development plans, and it was impacting their promotion and their retention and engagement data. And pretty soon, even extending it to sellers. So there's a misperception really that salespeople are only motivated by compensation. But we saw that when we invited sales teams to consider growth and development and continuing to learn and sharpen their learning toolkit, that 80% of them opted in to create learning plans and participate in optional learning programs. If you know sellers, you can't get 80% of them to do compliance training, let alone optional soft skill behavioral training. But they saw that we saw a 16% improvement in their relationship behaviors over 3 months. That is when sellers leaned into their own learning and development, that they saw measurable results in their improvements. We actually won some industry awards for this program. So again, the key takeaway here is that we focused on getting the supplies to the troops that the C-suite was having the headaches about first, but we also anticipated the organizational challenges. We didn't just take orders, we proactively identified a strategy for developing leader pipeline, for improving retention, for improving engagement, et cetera. And then we went about showing a proof of concept in the immediate headache of the C-suite that we could then scale out. And so within 3 years, this was really a cultural transformation. So very quickly, the 3 cases, what I want to illustrate is what I say: dream big, start small, and scale fast. So all of them had data where we dream big. We are strategists who solve business problems through L&D and HR solutions. We start small, whether it was the headache of the C-suite that we took on, and then demonstrate success. And then from there, we can scale fast. So that this becomes really an engine for our superpowers when we leverage our data insights this way. So I do want to leave us a little bit of time for questions. We covered at a glance how learning business metrics can inform one another, and that leveraging that across the organization, moving beyond the traditional level 0, level 1, level 2 into deeper level impact for our solutions. So if I could ask for another poll really quickly, and to ask you, based on what we were talking about today, are there strategies that you think you may be able to plan to apply based on today's discussion? Maybe these are some takeaways from today. Quick poll. So I guess the poll didn't get open, but it sounds like folks in the chat were able to jump in and see. Thank you for that. To business KPIs and measuring, using the data to create more informed, targeted learning, and even thinking about scaling the learning beyond training to get to a broader talent and business guys and headaches. Okay, great. So I know we have just a few minutes left. So if there are any questions, if you want to put in chat a question, and we'll be able to probably take one or two. You can raise your hand to go off mute, or maybe just submit them in the chat function.
Nancy, we had a question earlier in the presentation. What type of data are you collecting from DISC and 360?
What kind of data are you collecting from it? So the data points in the assessments. So in the case of the work of leaders, and that really shows you to what extent leaders have vision, have alignment towards that vision, and have strengths and opportunities around execution to that vision. So there were 30 data points or so within that survey around around vision, alignment, and execution. So we were able to aggregate and see those trends across the organization. That's where we saw people are great at execution. They didn't always get folks aligned before they head out the door. And 360 as well. These were custom 360s based on what the organization wanted to measure. And then we were able to roll that up and see trends as well. In that case, again, very rich culture-driven organization. We had questions that were action verbs, taking the culture core values and seeing to what extent people were really living the core values, and to what it would were, as I mentioned, strong people first culture, but to where some of their functional areas were perceived as not as strong, especially around communication skills. So that we are almost out of time. So what I'd like to ask you to do is, for me too, data feedback is a gift. So in the chat function, we're going to put in a link to a survey. I think it's already in there. It's just a couple of quick questions. If I could ask you to do that now, if you click on that link on your end, that will open a browser on your end that is not something that we can see. That data will be collected anonymously, and it will give us a good look into what worked today and where there may be other areas of opportunity for further webinars.
And one final question.
Sure.
Is it best to use aggregator to report for data, or run chart to look for trends?
I tend to, dig into the data if I understand that. I don't think that a canned aggregated report always tells the nuanced stories. And so I tend to take the raw data and dig in behind it and pivot tables and sort and color code and start to see what stories emerge, sort of, like a novelist writing as it emerges based on the data. So I would run the data, dig into the raw data, if I understand that question.
Thank you. And I think that's all.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you everyone today for your time. My contact information is here if you do want to follow up. This has been a pleasure, and want to say thank you. Appreciate your time today. Look forward to seeing you on one of our next webinars.